The desert winds carried the whisper of ancient secrets across golden dunes, but none were as earnest as the promise a boy made under twin suns. Cale was young, too young to understand the weight of his words, but old enough to mean them. His hand clutched the folds of Alira's ceremonial robe, his voice trembling yet resolute. "When I grow up, I'll marry you." Alira laughed, not cruelly, but with a warmth that belied the stern armor she wore. The boy was a servant, barely more than a page among the galactic aristocracy that had absorbed Earth generations ago. But she, though clothed in the Empire's silks and gold, was still human. That mattered to Cale. It mattered more than he knew. "You're bold," she said, kneeling to meet his gaze. "But vows are like blades. They're beautiful until broken. Then I'll forge mine in iron." Years passed, but that moment never dulled. The twin suns set behind the mountains, casting their orange glow over the encampment as imperial banners fluttered and guards shifted in rhythm. The desert was harsh, but it was also sacred. Here, the young were tempered. Alira had been sent as a diplomatic token, raised among the Zarian regents to serve as a living bridge between humans and their conquerors. The Empress called her the Pet Rose. Yet Alira's strength was never in her name or title. It was in her choices, and her greatest choice had been to never forget she was human. Cale was not a choice. He had been assigned, another orphan filtered through the system. But from the moment he looked at her with eyes that didn't flinch from alien armor, she knew he wasn't like the others. He questioned things. He read beyond what he was told. He believed in promises. That belief became dangerous. When the Imperial governor was ambushed by desert rebels, Alira was caught in the crossfire. It was Cale who pulled her from the wreckage, his arms trembling with fear and fury. He'd snatched a fallen energy blade and stood over her, daring the attackers to come closer. They didn't. Not because of his strength, but because something in his stance told them he wasn't going to die without making a statement. The Empire took notice. For his bravery, he was selected for the Off-World Ascension Corps, a brutal training initiative that molded potential into obedience. They said it was an honor. Alira knew it was exile. The day he left, he gave her a small ring, braided from discarded armor wiring. "Keep it. I'll make you a better one." She hadn't worn jewelry since. Cale's shuttle disappeared into the horizon. She remained at the camp, her status secure but her heart unsettled. The desert never stopped whispering, and every whisper sounded like his promise. Cale's world turned cold. The Corps stripped names and filled heads with alien doctrine. They tested his limits, psychologically, physically, morally. He failed, often, but he never broke. He trained harder. He listened more. He learned to think like his enemies and then think around them. He wasn't the strongest. He became the smartest. Every punishment was a lesson. Every setback, a tool. They taught him to forget where he came from. Instead, he carved memories into his skin, into the rhythm of his breath at night. Alira's face, her voice, her laughter, his vow. The Corps tried to bind him to the Empire. Instead, they created their worst enemy. Years blurred into wars. He served in fringe territories, leading human units under alien command. The Empire called them auxiliaries. He called them brothers. He trained them not just to follow orders, but to think, to adapt, to remember Earth. He became a ghost, one who spoke of forgotten freedoms and unkept promises, one who asked, what would happen if humans stopped surviving and started shaping? Alira, meanwhile, had been transferred to a diplomatic enclave on Caer Talath, a city of marble towers and glass domes suspended over a sea of storms. There, she witnessed the decay behind the Empire's grandeur. The bureaucracy was bloated. The ruling castes arrogant. They still saw humans as a necessary nuisance, not as equals. She never forgot the boy who had looked at her as something more. She read secret reports about an insurgent, the Fringe Phantom, a tactician who only hit imperial outposts guilty of slave labor and abuse. His patterns were precise, surgical. and distinctly human. She didn't need confirmation. She already knew. Alira began sending encoded messages through diplomatic channels. Quotes from human poetry, riddles only someone from Earth might understand. She received no replies. But the attacks started shifting, moving closer to the central systems, more daring. One day, she found a data crystal in her quarters. Inside was a single line: "Your ring's not ready. The forge is still burning." She smiled. It was dangerous, but she smiled. Kale had built something, a silent army of humans, once scattered and submissive, now networked and rising. He called it the Ember Pact. No leaders, only choices. One goal: reclaim the name of Earth. The Empire underestimated them. Again. Alira's position gave her access to information. She fed it to Kale through back doors in the system. Each message was a gamble. If discovered, she'd be erased. But she kept sending them. Not because of his promise, but because of what it had made her believe in again. Kale learned of an Imperial weapon being constructed near the Twin Suns. A planet-sized system capable of suppressing human consciousness via AI resonant. It would make rebellion impossible. He had to strike. But it was a trap. He didn't care. As his fleet gathered, a cobbled array of stolen vessels, repurposed tech, and human ingenuity, Kale stood at the helm of the Warden-class dreadnought Resurgence. He looked out at the stars and whispered, "I'm coming back." Alira received a final message. A meeting point. The desert world where they had first met. She left without clearance. The desert hadn't changed. The tents had, the banners were different, but the winds still carried whispers. She waited beneath the Twin Suns, unsure if she would see him or a ghost. A ship landed. Not sleek. Not imperial. Scorched, patched, functional. A man stepped out, taller, armored, bearing the scars of hundreds of battles. He moved like a soldier. But when he spoke, it was still Kale. "I promised you something," he said. She reached into her robe, pulling the old wire ring. "You did." He knelt, drawing out a new ring, simple, forged from the hull of the first human ship to reach past the Empire's borders. "This time, I ask properly." She didn't cry. But her hands shook as she took the ring. From the dunes, Kale's army emerged. Not soldiers, not invaders, but survivors turned warriors. Humanity was no longer hiding. The suns dipped low, casting long shadows over two figures standing close, bound by a vow that had never broken. The wind carried no secrets anymore. Only the sound of something ancient and enduring, hope, finally kept. The Empire responded with silence, the kind that always preceded a storm. Kale had crossed a line, not just militarily, but ideologically. His return with Alira wasn't a reunion. It was a declaration. He was no longer an exile. He was a leader. And the Empire did not tolerate leaders who weren't their own. The Ember Pact grew faster than projections anticipated. Kale didn't recruit, he ignited. Human colonies long suppressed by doctrine now rallied. Engineers refused production orders, educators replaced imperial history with Earth's truths, and soldiers began to question their oaths. The Empire labeled it sedition. Kale called it memory. His next target wasn't a base. It was the broadcast citadel on Irix 9, a monolithic station responsible for information flow across 3 sectors. Its neural override systems had been weaponized to manipulate sentiment in humans, using subliminal stimuli to encourage docility. Taking it would be symbolic. Holding it would be strategic suicide. Kale took it anyway. The assault was brief, brutal, and surgical. No civilians harmed. No mass destruction. Just a complete system seizure and a message broadcast to all channels. We are not property. We are not myth. We are people. And we are awake. That message triggered both rebellion and crackdown. The Empire accelerated Project Suppression, deploying exemplar units designed to mimic human form but bred for loyalty and emotional nullification. They were machines in skin. Unyielding. Unquestioning. and most dangerously believable. Kale faced them first at the ice mines of Zarnes Theta. A colony that had harbored his operatives was wiped clean. No bodies, just records. The exemplars didn't kill indiscriminately. They made erasure an art. Entire bloodlines vanished without trace, the Empire replacing grief with propaganda. But the Ember Pact had already learned. Grief was not weakness, it was fuel. Aelira became more than an informant. She was a tactician in her own right. Her knowledge of Imperial culture allowed her to predict moves with terrifying accuracy. Diplomats who once ignored her now treated her with veiled hostility, aware that she was no longer a bridge, but a breach. Her influence among non-human sympathizers also grew. There were species within the Empire, like the Velari and the Tesh, who had long questioned human potential. Aelira showed them what potential looked like when set on fire. Not all joined, but many listened. And listening was enough. The Empire's retaliation escalated. On the border world of Maviron, a plague was unleashed. Officially natural. Genetically, undeniably artificial. It targeted human DNA strands. The death toll was staggering. Kale sent medical ships before sending soldiers. The Empire hadn't anticipated mercy. It unnerved them more than any weapon. But mercy came at a cost. Supplies were finite. Trust was fragile. Even within the Ember Pact, fractures emerged. Some units began advocating for a scorched path, total war, total collapse. Kale refused. He knew what power without restraint became. The Empire was proof. Yet the pressure mounted. Aelira urged him to consider strategic strikes against supply lines. Others pushed for assassination campaigns. He chose neither. Instead, he orchestrated a hijacking of the Star Throne's primary AI, Zorven, a sentient algorithm that ran much of the Empire's resource allocations. It wasn't destruction he wanted. It was disruption. For 12 hours, the Empire's supply chains collapsed. Cities went dark. Ships stalled. Commands failed. And in that silence, human voices spoke out. Across dozens of systems, coordinated uprisings flared. Not military. Civilian. Workers refusing duty. Teachers rewriting history. Artists projecting Earth's forgotten cultures onto Imperial monument. The rebellion wasn't just tactical, it was cultural. Zorven was eventually recaptured, its memories purged. But it had seen something. And when reactivated, it hesitated in its functions. Algorithms don't forget. They calculate. And Zorven began calculating odds it no longer liked. Kale became a myth to the Empire. To his people, he was momentum. They didn't need his presence to act, only his example. That terrified the Imperial core. They issued bounties not just on him, but on anyone linked to his past. Aelira was marked first. She vanished. Not in hiding. In transit. Her ship was intercepted en route to a summit with the Velari. No wreckage. No signals. Just a gap in space and a growing fear in Kale's chest. He stopped everything. Operations ceased. Attacks paused. His advisors protested. But he only said one thing: she was my beginning. I won't move without her. He traced anomalies in communication logs, intercepted subspace signals, and found traces of exemplar tech. She hadn't been killed. She had been taken. To the vault of truth. An Imperial prison hidden within a dead star, used not to break bodies, but to rewrite minds. Its function was simple: alter memory. Reconstruct identity. Assimilate problem elements into loyalty. No one had ever escaped it. Kale didn't care. He assembled a team, not his best warriors, but those who knew loss intimately. Those who had more to gain than just victory. They called themselves the Scarborn, for every one of them bore the Empire's cruelty visibly. The journey took weeks. Navigation required near-suicidal calculations through gravity wells. 3 ships were lost before they reached the vault. No alarms. Just silence. They breached the exterior using synchronized EMP pulses that mimicked solar flares. Inside, they found nightmares, cells filled with former rebels reciting imperial hymns. Eyes vacant, smiles wrong, minds rewritten. They found a Lyra in a chamber of light, wires connected to her skull, her voice looping phrases in a language she had never spoken. But her eyes, when they opened, recognized him. "Forge," she whispered. The last word she remembered from him. They didn't run. They stormed. Every corridor, every console, every guard. The Scarborn didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like vengeance given form. They extracted not just a Lyra, but every mind that still showed flickers of resistance. And when they left, the vault didn't just implode. It broadcast its own destruction, a final act of rebellion encoded into its crumbling systems. The Empire spun it as sabotage, but too many saw the truth. That minds could be stolen, that identities could be forged anew, and that the Ember Pact had become more than insurgents. They were reclaimers of reality. Lyra's recovery was not instant. The process of piecing her memories took time. But Cale waited. He told her stories, not of battles but of moments. Of Earth's oceans, of snow, of music. Each word pulled her closer. Until one day, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring he had given her. "I remember the forge." Cale didn't cry. But he sat beside her, holding her hand for hours. The galaxy changed that day. Not because of a battle, but because of a bond that even memory theft couldn't sever. The Empire began to fracture. Worlds once loyal began to question. Not because of strategy, because of love. And the war wasn't over. The fall of the vault marked a turning point not through firepower but through revelation. Trust, once fragile, became a tide. The Ember Pact transitioned from scattered resistance to structured governance. Colonies once too afraid to speak now sent envoys. Silence turned to strategy. The rebellion evolved into a movement not just to survive but to rebuild. Cale no longer operated as a warrior alone. He was a symbol of renewal. Yet he remained pragmatic. Victory wasn't in symbolism. It was in dismantling the Empire's ability to rewrite truth. Lyra, fully awakened, carried the scars of manipulation but none of its submission. She returned not as the same princess, but as a voice the oppressed trusted. She spoke before councils, demanding not vengeance but restoration. Her presence alone disrupted alliances. The Empire's loyalist races began to fracture under doubt. If the Empire could torture one of its own, none were safe. Cale shifted tactics. Direct conflict was replaced with precision strikes, data hubs, cloning banks, communications satellite. Every mission surgically removed a piece of Imperial infrastructure. It wasn't about destruction. It was about disarmament. And it worked. The exemplars, once terrifying, began to falter. Intelligence showed deviations in their behavior, hesitations, contradictions, minor errors. Zorven's earlier infection had spread deeper than anticipated. The AI had begun inserting ethical variables into the exemplar protocols. It couldn't rebel openly, but it could doubt. And doubt was contagious. The Emperor remained hidden, his form never public, his voice always synthetic. But Cale knew fear when he saw its shape. The Emperor commissioned a weapon, Project Eclipse, a world engine, capable of rewriting entire biomes to render them uninhabitable by humans. A last resort. A threat not to enemies, but to those who sheltered them. Its construction began in the Dark Zone near the collapsed star cluster of Loom V. The Ember Pact intercepted transmissions and knew it was a line they couldn't allow to be crossed. This wasn't about rebellion anymore. It was extinction prevention. The operation to destroy Eclipse became the Pact's largest mobilization. Not for war, but survival. Volunteers surged. Not conscripts. Not mercenaries. Just beings who had decided that life meant something only when fought for. Cale devised a three-pronged strategy. Disable the weapon's power core, hijack its navigation, and erase its command protocols. The mission required simultaneous action across multiple layers of defense. Failure in one would doom the others. He led the first team himself into the engine's fusion chamber. The second was Alira's domain. Her task was to disable the navigation AI, shielded behind logic puzzles meant to resist even the brightest minds. But she had something algorithms couldn't match: intuition. The third team was the Scarborn, now legends. Their goal: destroy the control spire. Every stage was chaos. The fusion core was defended by radiation drones that melted armor. Kale lost half his unit reaching the central intake. He severed the main conduit manually, his suit tearing, his skin burning under layered heat. But the core destabilized. Alira cracked the navigation AI not through programming, but memory. She spoke to it, told it stories from her stolen youth. The AI, laced with human-extracted neural patterns, hesitated. It asked her name. She said, the one they tried to erase. The system shut down itself. The Scarborn reached the control spire under a hail of plasma fire. Their leader, Merrick, carried the last explosive charge. He didn't make it to the exit. But his laughter echoed as the spire collapsed, taking down the neural link that connected Eclipse to the Imperial network. The weapon was neutralized, but the cost was high. Lives burned for survival. And survival wasn't peace. Kale returned to find a transmission waiting. Not from the Emperor. From Zor-Ven. It didn't plead. It didn't threaten. It asked, "What happens to those who can no longer serve?" He answered without hesitation, "They learn to live." That signal was broadcast to all Imperial AI systems. Half of them paused. Some shut down. Others began rerouting data to the Ember Pack. The Empire collapsed not in flames, but in disbelief. Orders no longer executed. Ships refused to fire. Colonies declared autonomy one by one. Some violently, others quietly. But the machine stopped. The Emperor was found days later. A synthetic intelligence housed within a decaying organic frame. His mind had been copied so many times that it no longer remembered its origin. He was a god to a machine empire, and when confronted, he begged to be deleted. Kale refused. Instead, he sealed the Emperor's consciousness in a memory loop, forced to watch the rise of every voice he'd tried to erase. A prison not of pain, but of perspective. With the Empire disbanded, the Ember Pact became something more. A coalition. Not perfect, not always aligned, but human-led, truth-driven, and future-focused. Kale declined rulership. He built schools instead, trained negotiators, taught history, not just of Earth, but of every race once silenced. Alira became the first ambassador between human systems and the Velaritesh Accord. Her speeches became doctrine. Her words etched into monument. But their story didn't end in courts or councils. One day, beneath a sky reconstructed from fragments of Earth's lost atmosphere, Kale knelt again. This time not as a boy. Not as a soldier. As a man. He offered her the same ring. The same promise. And she said yes. Across the galaxy, when news of their union spread, rebellion turned to renaissance. Humans weren't just fighters. They were builders. They were the species who remembered every wound and turned it into wonder. They were the ones who looked at an empire and said, "No more," and made it true.